Hey everybody! Today I have with me Heidi Vanderlee, the founder of Positive Jam. Now, Positive Jam is a PR firm that specializes in comedy, podcasting, live entertainment, and social justice, which I am super fascinated by. And Heidi has over a decade's experience in entertainment and PR. So she is a brilliant person to be able to ask about all things PR as it relates to comedy, entertainment, and more. Heidi, before we dive in, is there anything else you'd love people to know about you and your work?
Sure. I think that I was saying to you before we started talking, like, I should think a little more about our description because it's evolved a bit. The kind of work we do has evolved a bit over the past now like 10 years. But yeah, we work with people who have something really important to say, and it is sometimes comedy, sometimes it's comedy adjacent.
Mm.
But a lot of the people we work with have so much going on that they don't necessarily fit into one category.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And to ask a really basic question, when we say PR, like I might have some assumptions about what that might mean, but do you mind saying, like, for other people like me that are, writers or podcasters and kind of hear
Sure.
the term, what do you mean by it when you say PR?
I think PR for me, or the way that I try to explain it, is like getting the thing that you made that you really ostensibly care about in front of other people who might like it and who don't have like a financial reason to write about it or feature
Yeah.
you. Because I think a lot of times PR and marketing get conflated and they can work really well together. But I'm pretty, what's the word? I try to be pretty clear that like PR is not marketing and vice versa, because marketing usually involves spending ad dollars. And I basically try to say if it has to do with money changing hands, that's usually not my job.
Yeah.
So I see it as trying to find the right people who would really care about the project that I'm working on and who would want to talk to the creator of it, and just kind of giving, not kind of, but like if you've spent so much time on this project or this work that you really care about, uh, it's good to keep in mind that you're competing with a lot of other people who also care about their work, and it's helpful to try to give it a little boost or a big boost, try to stand out among the crowd. But yeah, I really do think of it as like it's really just a whole system of goodwill that works sometimes.
Mm.
And we do our best to help people understand why what we're working on is important and why they should care about it.
Yeah. And so I love that. And so, inferring from what you've said, it sounds like, and let me know if I'm wrong, but it sounds like relationship building is going to be super important in that because, like you say, it's not even necessarily transactional in terms of money. So, if that
Mm.
is correct, would you mind speaking a little bit to how you think about that? And if I'm off, just let me know.
No, that's true. I mean, the reason that I mentioned money is because like if you are coming from the outside, if and this is totally makes sense. Like if you're not in marketing and PR, and you're a creative. A lot of the people that I come to work with us are creatives who have never done marketing or PR, and that's makes sense. They're supposed to be good at creative,
Yeah.
you're not necessarily the business side of it, but I think there's a really big difference between basically pay to play and somebody writing about or featuring your project because they want to or because they think it's interesting or their editor does. Um, what was the first part of your question again? I'm sorry.
No, it's not a problem. So I was wondering, like, how much then relationship building is at the core of
Oh,
that
yeah.
in terms of the kind of relationships that you have to build to know where to place it, or
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I'm nodding and forgetting I'm in a podcast.
No
Um,
problem.
uh, Relationships are hugely important. Um, there are relationships that we've had for a long time, writers and producers and bookers that we work with very often, who we've known over the years, and even sometimes followed them from publication to show, because everything's so fluid in media
Mm.
in not a great way, honestly. But keeping up those relationships is really important. It's also important to, in my opinion, try to identify new people that would care about the project we're working on, because folks are constantly changing beats. The way media works is constantly changing, and we never have we never apply a one size fits all approach to our clients. There are people that we go to all the time for most of our clients because we think they'll be interested. But we also know that it's important to tailor our outreach specifically to who we're working with. So just for an example, I'm working on a book right now that has to do with Olympic swimmers. Now, I can reach out to everyone who's written about books, right? But I don't necessarily have a big Olympic swimming media list. So then I go out there and try and figure out who on the Olympic in that area of media would care about this. And we've already found some folks who do care about it. It's just people like to know that what they write about or cover.
Yeah.
It's really important.
Yeah, and I mean that's see, it's really key, and I know it's everything is like specific cases, but are there any general things as well that spring to mind when you think about that? Because you must have to write, like you say, you've got those long-standing relationships, but if you're reaching out to new people, you are having to write those new pitches. And I have had like some pitches come into even me as a podcaster, and I see the sort of differences between them, what works for me and what doesn't. But you've kind of got that like long-term perspective. Are there any general things that you think this is something that really, as a core principle, people do need to think about, or conversely, any things where you think definitely a red flag, like do not do that, avoid, that's like a real rookie mistake?
I will say, with the caveat that it's difficult to keep up on absolutely everything that everyone's doing all the time. That's really difficult. And so I just want to say I acknowledge that. And I have definitely sent the odd misdirected pitch where they've been like, this show hasn't, we haven't been making it for 6 months. And I'm like, crap. And because I didn't know, and, we do our best to keep up to date on that kind of thing, but sometimes you can't, and sometimes you make mistakes. I think that there is a difference between that and kind of mass emailing anybody who shows up under the category comedy. Like we use a database called Podchaser. So shout out to Podchaser. They're pretty great. That allow you to search for podcasts by genre. And they actually have a filter that says like accepts guests, right? So that's very helpful. Because what will happen a lot of times, and I've seen this on both sides because I'm both pitching, but then also I work with folks who make podcasts or make shows, and they'll say, wow, I got this, we don't even have guests. I don't know why I'm getting this pitch. And it's like, do your homework. Like, again, nobody's perfect. You might send out the odd mistake pitch. It might just not make sense. But if it's very obviously like a mass email, and it's very obviously not really tailored to the person you're sending it to. And like, once again, we will write pitches that are just not a general guest pitch, but just like, here is here is the person, here's what they did, here's why I think you'll think they're interesting. Are you interested? And then we'll usually customize it to say like, hey, blah, 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 at blah, blah, blah. This is for you, so it doesn't. So I'm not going to say that we write like a completely unique pitch for every single person, because we just wouldn't get anything done. So we're always trying to balance, like, I think like what is most important is making sure who you're writing to makes sense, because then the pitches that you've written will make sense to them, right? Like, so if you're like, this is the kind of pitch I would write to somebody who has X kind of show covering X, that's not going to come off as weird to those people. But if you have not done research and you're like, this is a show about X to this person whose show is about Y, and the person gets it and is like, huh? Like, that's pretty easy to avoid. You just have to kind of do your homework. You just have to look at who you're sending to. No blind emails, no big like mass, like, don't spam people. Yeah.
And what's it like for you in terms of timelines and managing different media? Because I can only speak to my only very small experience, which is not in PR. But I know, for example, when I receive things, sometimes it just doesn't line up with the timeline of the show, because I think people possibly don't know how far in advance I sometimes record to be able to kind of batch things and know things are going to work out. Whereas they're kind of thinking that I might be able to do it much sooner, whereas I just wouldn't have time to read the book, come up with the questions, schedule it. The schedule's already like sorted a long way in advance. So that's one thing that I see, but that's only one kind of media, and you're probably dealing with all kinds of different media. How do you kind of think about timelines and managing that?
It
Like say
does
if a
really.
client comes to you and is like, I've got a show, like for example, some recent guests, they've got a show they're taking to Edinburgh in August, which is like the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. So it's a bit off. Like we're recording this in June. How would you sort of think
Yeah.
about a timeline for them as an example?
There's like two different parts to that. One is the client part. So like if you're the creative, like you've made something that you really care about. And lots of times what will happen is folks won't think about PR until they're done with the project,
Yeah.
right? When it's done and it's ready to be out. Unfortunately, most publicists and firms will be booked out for months and months and months. Like
Right.
that's almost always the case with us. So I have folks come to me like with something really great that I would love to work on, but it's coming out in a month. And even if I did have the availability, which we almost never do, a month is like barely enough lead time, in my opinion. And that's so I would just say from the beginning, like if you're working on something that you really care about, and you have to make a budget of some kind when it comes to like advertising and distribution, include PR in there. I mean, like you don't have to do PR. I'm not saying everyone has to, but if it's even something that you're considering, include it in your budget from the beginning. And like, so for example, like, Kate Willette, who you talked to, who's one
Yeah.
of my clients who I adore, she and I have been talking about working together for like a year. She was like, I'm making this special. I want to work with you. Like she had it on her brain that she was going to do that like way back when the special was being filmed. And that way I was able to hold the time for her and she was able to, budget for it. And then we worked together and it was great. So that was really cool. Unfortunately, not everyone has like either the foresight or like they aren't advised on it, especially if it's like their first thing. Like I totally get it. But it's something that I try to say as much as possible without sounding like you totally need me, because sometimes you don't. But if you want it as an option, think of it early on. And then there's the other side, which is me pitching to shows and journalists, which I think is the main question you asked. And I would say that one of the great things about podcasting is that the timelines really vary. And like sometimes people will book out for a really long time. But even what's considered a long time in podcasting, like is not very long compared to print and online media. Because like, we work with whenever I work on a book, for example, they'll be like, oh, I needed this 6 months ago. And I'm like, yeah, that's not, that very rarely do I get that kind of timeline. Sometimes I do, and it's great. And we get the best. I always say the more time I have to work with you, the best, we'll get the best results of it. But I understand not everyone has the budget for that. And that like, that's legit. That's a real thing. But there are times where I've had the opportunity to work on people with really long lead projects. And we do always get the best results that way. So the thing that's wonderful about podcasting, and podcasts were really only starting to be like a thing that people saw as desirable about 10 years ago, I would say in PR, like it was still kind of a new thing. And like, if I'm being real, there are still publicists that I know that are like podcasts. I'm like, yes, I'm like, come on. It's important. But like, even if a podcast is booked out for say 2-3 months, you won't be waiting on it as long as you might be waiting on it for a written piece. And the host/producer is probably still willing to do it, because it's not necessarily like the host and producer aren't going to be like, well, this came out, before, we can't print it, like the way that like print and online is. Like they're way more tied to like release date. And then for the client, like not only do they have more fun doing it, usually like it's a lot more fun to just kind of be yourself on a podcast rather than do more of a formal interview. And then there's another reason for them to say, hey, I was on this podcast. Remember this thing I did? This was about that. And it kind of extends the promotional cycle. So I always say that. I'm like, look, this isn't going to come out until after this is released, but that's okay, because it will probably draw in new people. It's not like everything, it's no longer the case that like everyone has to read or listen to or watch your thing the week it happens. For people to know about it.
Brilliant. And I've got a couple of follow-up questions from that. So one is that you mentioned budget. And so if there was someone to say they've written a book or they've made, like you say, Kate Willett, who will be going out the week before your episode, had both an Audible original and a recent special. So
Mm-hmm.
they've created that product, that piece of art. How do they even start to talk to a PR firm about budget? Like, do they have to kind of go to them and say, this is how much, like, how do they, like, for someone like me, I wouldn't
Sure.
even quite know where to start talking about that and how that might work.
Yeah, I think the things that are most helpful to me when somebody asks me, like, how much will this cost me, basically, are like,
Yeah.
what is it? When is it
Yeah.
happening? How long do you want to work together? How big of a scope do you want to work together on? Are there tour dates? So, like,
Mm.
for example, if somebody's releasing an album or a special, but then they also have tour dates in like a few Midwestern cities and they want me to work on both things, that's going to be
Mm.
like a higher fee, obviously, because it's different campaigns, right? So like there's like the
Yeah.
national campaign and maybe New York if you're based in New York, but then like all those separate media markets are different campaigns. So that would be a more costly campaign than if you were just working on the release itself and
Mm.
booking podcasts and stuff. So I say, like, what you want the kinds of media that you want to be reaching out to or have the publicist reach out to, that's important. How long is a big
Mm.
one. At this point, we have a 2-month minimum, except in rare cases, because, like, I always say, like, we have to have the time to do follow-up, or else, like, you just annoy the heck out of people because you can't email them every other
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
If you were getting follow-ups from a publicist like every other day, you'd be like, please stop. And
Yeah.
I don't do that because it drives people crazy. So yeah, sorry, let me try and answer that more succinctly.
No, that's great.
How long do you want to work together? What kind of a project is it? And when? Because, like, if somebody says, I have this coming up, but it might not be for 3 years, I
Mm.
can't really make a ballpark, estimate then, because, like, who knows what will be happening in 3 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think just having basics, timeline, scope, how long, that really
Mm.
helps.
Yeah. And does what you do also cover social media like Twitter, X, Instagram, or do you kind of leave that to individual creators and you kind of more focus on the kind of broader media landscape, or does it vary?
We don't do social media consulting simply because I personally do not think I'm the best person for that.
Yeah.
I will, and this is a larger thing. Like Deb Pressman, who is my work partner, work wife.
Mm.
We are very much. We really believe in staying in our lane, which is like
Mm.
we do PR.
Yeah.
Social media consulting, social media management is a separate profession that people are absolutely
Mm.
incredible at. And I personally just would not feel comfortable charging money for it because, like, I have some knowledge. Like, I know that, like, for example, like, faces perform better than text on an Instagram grid, right? Or,
Mm.
like, don't worry about posting too much because stuff shows up, in different feeds depending on who they are. But I really have not, I just don't have the expertise uh, of somebody who would do a really good job at that.
Yeah. So it's thinking more like podcasts, print media, online
Mm-hmm.
media. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Like,
Yeah.
and occasionally, like, there will be, a project or someone we think they should be introduced to that we might run across while we're working together.
Mm.
Which go, maybe like, oh, this person is like producing this show. Do you want to talk to them? Like, I can't think of a specific example right now, but we will introduce people to other folks in like more of an agency way, like if it makes sense.
Mm.
Or, but we don't really do that as a rule. It's not really something we promise because it usually happens pretty organically.
Yeah.
We try to stay in our lane because it's like we do this thing very well, and that's our job and that's what we do. That
Yeah.
way, like, it's like, why didn't you do a good job on this social media campaign? Well, because that's not my job.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. And I'm curious, like, because like I don't know, from the outside, it does seem like media changes so fast, but then maybe some of the principles are still the same. So I'm just curious where you sit from, like we're in June 2024 right now. Do you feel like you can kind of see changes coming in the next year? Like, do you already sort of start to see trends or things that, yeah.
Oh,
What,
yeah. I
yeah.
mean, there's like really bad things and some really good things. Like the really
Okay.
bad thing is that some publications have fired staff and think they're going to write articles with AI. And it's already
Yeah.
happening, which is
Yeah.
like, not only is it dystopian, it's also just the work product is awful. Like it's really depressing. Like I want to say, I think it's like Geo Media, which owned until recently The Onion and like the
Mm.
AV Club, and they replaced some of their writers with AI.
Mm.
Or and I can't think of which publication this was, but I know of another one that basically used Google Translate to put out what Spanish people articles written in Spanish, and it's
Mm.
like I think that we're still in a period where people are very enchanted by AI. And when I say people, I mean a lot of non-creatives who have no idea how
Mm.
this works, but unfortunately are in charge of stuff.
Mm.
Um, but I think it's starting to trickle down where people are just like, oh yeah, this actually really sucks and is not fun to read or informative or like doing anything that media was supposed to do. So I think I predict a crash. It's just going to be like, it's like pivot to video all over again. Do you remember
Mm.
that?
What does that
Um,
mean? Pivot to video?
oh my God, it was this dumb thing that happened probably like, I mean, not even that long ago now, but like when Facebook was like, everyone should, put their things on our video platform. And then like
Mm.
Vice magazine was like, we're
Right.
firing most of our writers and we're doing
Right.
video. And BuzzFeed did it too. And it was like, and it failed
Mm.
spectacularly, because it's like these folks who are in charge of media get like these ideas, or really it's their shareholders. They're like trying to make their shareholders happy that they think is going to change the face of media. But because it's not their expertise and they don't actually know what they're talking about, it fails spectacularly. And then we all pay for it. And I'm being a
Mm.
little bit soapbox here, but I really have seen it happen like a few times. And it's just the only thing that happens is some people make a bunch of money and a lot of other people lose their jobs. And the rest of
Mm.
us don't have quality media to read.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's AI is going to have a pretty bad, disastrous effect on media to come. But I will say a positive thing that I see happening is a lot of publications and newsrooms and podcast networks are unionizing for the first time,
Mm.
which is incredible. And like, it's not easy, and it's definitely done from, in some cases, a place of relative desperation, because it's like watching the way that people are just getting axed with no regard for anything. I mean,
Mm.
we have terrible labor laws here in the United States. So forming a union is one of the best things you can do to protect yourself. And I'm really heartened by the fact that there are people just who have decided to unionize their newsrooms. And there are also some publications that are worker owned now that are like the folks who were, the editors of all these other great legacy publications that either got bought by somebody or acquired and then everyone got fired. And these people got together and like have worker owned publications now,
Mm.
which are doing really incredible work. And I'm sure it's hard. I'm sure that the money's not great, but that's even able to exist is really cool. So
Yeah.
it's a dark scene, but there are some light spots.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know that there's some light spots too.
Yeah.
My goodness. And you said earlier on in the conversation about the fact that people have put so much time into making what they want to make, and
Mm-hmm.
but actually then trying to connect it to the people who might enjoy that can be challenging. What kind of makes you really happy when you get sent something? What do you think are the kinds of things that, and if it's even possible to say, that kind of spark like attention, thinking, I can do something with this, like this is, I can see how to help cut this through. Are there any sort of commonalities across that? So you mentioned people with something to say. I just wonder what other kind of things really catch your attention.
We are so lucky in that I'd say 95% of our business is by referral. Um,
Okay.
so almost everyone who we work with has been referred to us by someone else that we've worked with, who we
Right.
obviously, if they liked us, I assume that would be the reason
Yeah.
why they refer.
Yeah.
Us, so there's kind of a common thread through all of the people we work with, that they're more concerned with the artistic side of what they're doing and the ideals of what they're doing rather than will this make me a bunch of money?
Yeah.
Because you can kind of, I mean, I come from a more idealistic place, I think, than a lot of people, but I really do believe that the media can tell when you're doing something because you want it to make money. Like, you know, like the Mr. Beasts and Jake Pauls of the world, like they're not doing that because they're like having a fun time. Like they're doing it because they're making a bunch of money.
Yeah.
And the people that we work with, the stuff that they make is who they are most of the
Yeah.
time. And you can tell, like, again, I'm just using Kate as an example because you talked to her,
Really
but
good
like,
example.
that's who Kate is. Like, Kate is outspoken and funny and says whatever she wants. And it has not, and she'll say this, it has cost her some stuff. You know, there's people who've been rubbed the wrong way by her politics, etc. But then that means that the people who do appreciate her really appreciate her. She has integrity. She
Yeah.
says what she thinks and believes. And a lot of folks don't do that because they're afraid of the ramifications, whether they be, you know, such and such person won't work with you, or, you know, the money or whatever. I feel that we're very lucky that we've been able to find, and who have found us, are people that make things that are really authentic to them. Another example I'll use is I work with Danny Tamborelli and his wife, Caitlin Detweiler. So Danny is best known as like, here in the US, we have Nickelodeon, which was like the kids' TV network. And he was, you know, a star. He was basically a child star, you know, and he was really known for that. And he and his wife have written these two really absolutely delightful young adult romance novels together. And both of them are very much informed by who they are as people. And since they have such funny, unique voices and they're really writing from what they know, the books are absolutely, it's just like you feel like you're getting to actually know them a little bit, even though there's obviously some fantasy to it because like they didn't want to like, the first book is basically their love story about how they met, but like through the lens of these other characters. And you can tell like, and they wrote it together while having like an infant. So like they really had to care about this, you know, to make
Yeah.
time to write about it, to write it. And you can really tell like they care about it so much. And like, it's just nobody else made them do it. Like nobody else was like, you know, I mean, to be fair that, you know, Kate is a literary agent. So she does have an idea, I think, of like what works out there, but you can kind of tell when somebody has been put up to something versus when they really wanted to do it because it felt important to them. I hope that answers
Yeah.
your question a little bit.
Yeah, it does. And do you think that's helpful then that they have like this really interesting personal story that lines up with the work? So I guess I'm asking like how much does that matter, or can it work both ways? Because it like, or because now I just have such a sense of like, oh, that's so interesting, like the Nickelodeon and the this
Yeah.
and then, but also that, yeah, is that helpful to have?
I don't think it necessarily has to be your exact story. Like you don't, if you like, cause some folks don't want to tell like their
No.
exact story.
Yeah.
But it has to be something you know something about, or you need to make sure that the person or institution or thing that you are making work about, you have to make sure that you're talking to someone who does know what they're talking about. um, you know, like try not to work in a vacuum. A lot of the people that we work with, yeah, some of them don't tell their own story. Some of them are filmmakers who are telling someone else's story, but like, did they do their homework? Did they work directly with the source? Did they make sure to consider that there are other people who maybe told this story before? Is there super similar? Like, you know, like it has to come from a place of truth somewhere, even if it's
Yeah.
not necessarily your own story.
Yeah. And what do you think? Because, like I say, you now you have the job of like trying to match it up to people that will be interested in that work. Sometimes I think in the media we hear the examples of where like a controversy has been put together to draw attention, and like the no press is bad press kind of like all that kind of sense. But that doesn't seem to necessarily fit like with what you're saying with it, things being very authentic and social justice. I wondered how you think about that, how you think about like catching attention. I guess I'm also thinking of slightly different thing, but like you mentioned Mr. Beast, and that like they literally like grabbing attention with
Yeah.
different stunts and monarchy.
And like, look, if that makes him happy, great.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm sure some people find some enjoyment. I just wouldn't know what to do with him.
Right.
Like here I am, like if I was Mr. Beast, but no one's asked me to forget it. You know what I mean? It just feels like a different universe. So I guess I shouldn't really. And there are a lot of people on social media who definitely do things for the bit that I absolutely enjoy, and it's super fun. You know, I enjoy TikTok. I love TikTok.
Yeah.
But I think that there are times where, because I am a publicist, there are times where I'll say something that I know will kind of pique people's interest. And like, if there's something that's like kind of a little attention grabby, I'll put it in the subject headline. But I don't think we're very careful not to ever be exploitative. Or like lie, honestly, like, try not to really like ever, or not try. We don't really ever say anything that's not true or throw anyone under the bus who would be hurt by what's happening. But I can tell you like one of the funniest examples of maybe getting close to that, but I'll explain why it didn't feel bad to me. And here's why. This I'm fine with you talking about. This Hollywood Gold podcast. Stay Gold Features is a really incredible film production studio in New York. They've worked on so many incredible films like Harriet, Nanny, Honey Boy. And so they have a podcast where the head of the studio talks to producers, screenwriters, directors, basically anyone who's not an actor. Right. And like, so the actor a lot of times will be like, I was in this film and it was fun. Like they're like, it was a great experience. Like they were in the movie, they were the star, they were treated well, etc. Most of the time. And then the thing is, when you talk to the producers, they're the ones who like had to figure out how to get like 17 polka dot dresses in the middle of the night. Like they are the ones who know what happened. So sometimes during these interviews, like these bananas stories would come out that like nobody knew, and so, and like sometimes it wasn't super savory, but most, nothing really like truly awful, but just like bonkers things. And now of course I'm forgetting the example. Oh, here's one. Madonna, the producers of Madonna's, Desperately Seeking Susan. Madonna was like kind of famous at the time. Like she was just starting to blow up in New York. And the producers didn't think she was going to be famous for that long. They thought she was a flash in the pan. So they like rushed the release of the movie because they were like, oh my God, we have to get this out before her 15 minutes are up. And it's Madonna. Like, what are you talking about? And so that was the thing that we found out during that interview where we were like, oh my God, I know. So then what I did was I sent it to the celebrity press that was like, Madonna, like producers didn't think Madonna was going to be famous enough to, and like, Madonna doesn't care. Madonna probably, if she even saw it, she was probably like, yeah, that was dumb, but that is, I think that's like probably that's probably the best example of me like using something that I know will grab the press to get something for my client. But, it's a victimless crime. Madonna's not upset.
Totally. Yeah, that makes so much sense. I love it. And as we're wrapping up, is there anything that we haven't covered that as you think of the audience who are listening to this, the people I hear from, they're writing, they're creating, they're people like Kate, they're making books, they're working on, their sitcom pilot. Is there anything that you kind of want to leave them with as they're sort of thinking about PR and their career?
Sure. I would say that one thing that a conversation that I have with clients fairly often, not as much anymore, but like when you say, if you go into a PR campaign and you're like, I want to be in this publication, this publication, this publication, this publication. My question for them would be, have you read that publication recently? Have you seen someone like you featured in it? Have you seen them featuring people who do this kind of thing? Because if not, it's not super realistic to expect that this might happen. And I'm not saying that because your thing isn't good. I'm not saying I won't try. I always try. I'll always try.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've been surprised. Like there have been times where the New York Times has been like, sure. And I'm like, what? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think being realistic about where your story might fit best is helpful. Like, like and again, it isn't a creative's job necessarily to be like reading all of the publications all the time and being sure who's the editor, where, or whatever. That's my job. So I would say, trust me, first of all, to know that, know if that's what's going on with those publications and who's writing for them. But also like, if you were featured in the New York Times in 2005, I'm sorry, New York Times. I'm not trying to just, dump on the New York Times. But like if you were featured in a big publication in 2005, it's a really different media landscape now. It's real different. I guarantee most of the people who were there aren't there anymore. So, and I always try to like say, hey, let's be like open-minded about where might make the most sense for you. Like I've had clients be like, I have no idea what this podcast is that you're putting me on, but okay. And then they have a great time. Sometimes they end up working together and collaborating, and and then a bunch of people who would have never heard of them before are now into them. So trust the person that you hire, I think, is the thing I can say. And not just like, you don't get to know what's going on, let me do my job, leave me alone. But just like, remember that I'm not a comedian, so I'm not going to tell you about comedy writing or what I think is best. So, and you don't have to be totally in the know about what publications are best. That's okay. I know that.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Yeah. No, that's really helpful. And really, I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of go behind the scenes of some of this and debunk some of it and help me kind of like with what those concepts and language might be. It's super helpful because sometimes it can seem like something that we use as a term, but it's like, but what is it really? So lovely to have a face to put to it.
There's so many different kinds of PR out there. Like, it makes total sense. There's people who say, I do PR. And I'm like, you're actually in marketing, but okay. But all I know is the way that we do it is what's worked for us for a long time. We love the people we work with. We feel very fortunate to continue to have people want to work with us. And I really love my job. So
I love it. And it's nice to work with people who love their job. So that's great. And where can people go to find out more about you, Heidi?
Me personally or the company?
Well, wherever you want to point people. So I'll put the links to your website in the show notes if that's what would be helpful. Is that the best place?
Check out our website, positivejampr.com. We're also on social media as both of those things. If you're curious about the kinds of people we work with, the kind of work we do, that is the best place to learn about us. And I just want to give a shout out to Deb Pressman, who is my work wife, and Brittany Gerkins, who is our assistant, who is a total godsend, and we love her.
Oh, fabulous. What a great team. Thank you so much. It's been really fun chatting with you today, Heidi.
You too, Danielle.